Greetings everyone, welcome back. Previous video we were working inside the lobby menu on the graph tab. So if you hop over to the graph tab, we set up the script for how our lobby menu will function. And now we need to set up our lobby game mode so that we can populate our lobby menu here with the correct information. So we're going to be working inside the lobby game mode in this video. Let's go ahead and close out the lobby menu if you still have it up. And before we jump into the lobby game mode, there's one thing that we're going to need to create inside of our lobby player controller. So let's go ahead and do that first. Down in the content, blueprints, lobby folder, open up the lobby player controller. And here's all the script for our lobby player controller that we currently created. We're going to do quite a bit more work in here, but we're just going to add one node for now so that we can access it from our game mode. And that node is going to be a custom event. So we're going to right click, custom event. This custom event is going to be called update available characters. And this event is going to be run on the owning client, and it is going to be reliable. And it's also going to need an input of the Boolean type. And we're going to call this available characters, like so. We're also going to make it an array. Now what this is going to do is on the server, we're going to keep track of which client selected which character, and we need to tell each player controller which characters are available. We don't want that done on the player controller on the client side. That's going to be handled inside of our game mode and distributed to each client via the lobby player controller. So they'll know which characters have been selected, which ones haven't, etc. So we're going to use this node for that. So let's compile and save and close this. And that's all we're going to do in here for now. And let's go ahead and open up the lobby game mode. Now we created a couple nodes in here already and a couple variables. We're going to do quite a bit in here actually. So let's go ahead and get started. We're not going to do any of these just yet. So I'm going to scroll up above these to an empty space. And the first node that we're going to add, we're going to right click and we're going to say event post login. Or event on post login is the actual name. So notification that a player has successfully logged in and has been given a player controller. So when somebody logs in and is assigned a player controller, this is the first event that would get called. So this is going to be part of our initial game mode setup section here. So the other thing that we'll do is we'll right click and we'll say there's a node called switch has authority. If you've watched some of the blueprint videos already, you've probably seen what this switch has authority does. But essentially if we select this and we connect it up, anything that follows this we can designate whether if it's running on the server, which is 99.9% of the time authority, or remote, a client machine. And it has the script has to be running on whichever one of these we define in order for the rest of it to execute. So if it's running on the client, it's not going to execute. It's going to execute this pin. So whatever we connect to this, if we want it to run exclusively on the server, we can connect it to that. So we're going to use that here, and everything that follows this, we're going to make sure that it's running on the server. You can use this for adding points to from the server side, adding points to clients or granting weapons or etc. that you don't want the clients to be able to run somehow. You want to make sure that's run on the server. Use this node. So first thing we're going to do is create a variable, actually, which we've already created. We don't need to create it. So let's hold control and drag this all player controllers in because we want to assign this player control to this variable. So we have a record of all connected player controllers. So let's drag off of this and say add. So just add. We'll connect this to there. And we'll connect the new player in like so. There are some alignment nodes. You can right click, select all nodes. It's the alignment. And you could say like align center. Nope, not that one. There are some alignment nodes that I haven't used quite a bit, but align middle. No, that's not the one. Oh, I know what it is. Let's undo this. Let's right click and say straighten connections is the one. There we go. So if you're wanting to have straight connections, you can do that. Right click and say alignment, straighten connections. I thought it was aligned for some reason. I haven't used these too much, but just wanted to show that option's there real quick. Okay, let's go ahead and continue. Next thing we'll do is we'll get all actors of class. And what we're going to be checking for now is player starts so that we can get a reference to all the spawn points. So player start. Now ours is going to be a free-for-all. Now, of course, this one's not going to be a line. Whatever. Ours is going to be a free-for-all, so we don't need to designate specific spawn points for our players. If you were doing a team deathmatch or something like that, and you wanted designated spawn points, on the player start there is a player start tag that you can define, and you can say red team, blue team for some set of player starts. And we're going to promote this to a variable in a second. But what you could do is then filter out based on tag and assign 2 different locations of where to spawn people. For us, we're just going to promote this to a variable and just call it spawn points. I'm going to right click on this, promote it to a variable, and call it spawn points. So it's going to be replicated. And let's go ahead and put it in server settings just so it's tucked away. So, okay, next thing that we'll need to do is get a reference to our game instance. So let's right click and say get game instance. Let's drag off this now and say cast2, which is our game info instance, the only one we have. Connect this up, connect that up. And what we want to get from this is the server name and the max players. So let's drag off of this and say get server name. And let's drag off this and say get max players. And we're going to promote both of these to variables, and they're going to be used to set up our lobby here in a second. So let's right click on this, promote that to a variable called server name. And let's replicate it and put it in server settings. Let's do the same thing for max players, promote that to a variable, which we'll call max players as well. So we're just getting the game instance version and passing that along to our game mode. So let's go ahead and set that to server settings and replicate it. Okay, next thing that we'll need to do is start processing our lobby player controller. So for that, I'm going to have to go back a little bit. And on this new player here, this player controller, I'm going to add a reroute node here. Just reroute. Because we're going to have to stretch this all the way down to the end. So pull this out and just say reroute. So that we don't have to keep going back to the beginning. Okay, now from this we can say cast to lobby PC. And inside of our lobby PC, we already created some initialization stuff as well. So if we drag off this, we say initial setup. That's what we're looking for there. Once we're done with the initial setup, there was another function in there that we created called setup lobby menu. So setup lobby menu is what we're going to call after that. You can see it's asking for the server name at that point. So we'll take our server name, drag and drop that on top. So we're going to pass that through now. And then following that, we have update lobby settings. So from our lobby player controller, we're now calling update lobby settings so that we have whatever the server defined map image is, the map name and map time, all of our settings. Now for these, we're going to promote these to variables as well because we're going to have game mode versions of these. So I'm going to right click on this and promote this to a variable, and we'll call this the GM underscore map image. So the game mode map image. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Control Z. It's tucked way back there. Okay, and the game mode map image is going to be replicated, and let's put it in a category. So let's do the same thing for these two. So let's right click on this, promote this to a variable. We'll call it GM map name. So pain in the butt. Let's go ahead and server settings, replicated, and map time, which we'll call GM map time. Let's go ahead and put that down there. Server settings and replicated. So all three of those should be replicated and assigned to server settings. And then the last thing that we're going to do, we're going to create a custom event that we're going to call in here. So let's go ahead and create that custom event. Let's move these down just a little bit. This custom event is going to be called respawn player. So we'll call it custom event and respawn player. And this is going to handle actually spawning and possessing the default base character when you arrive inside the lobby. So this respawn player is going to be executed on the server. So run on server. It's going to be reliable. It is going to need an input too, so let's add an input. The input's going to be a player controller reference. So player controller reference. And we'll just call it player controller, it's fine. So, and we'll come back and set this up in a second. I just wanted to create the node so that we can call it down here at the end of our setup, our initial setup. So we've gone through our initial setup. We're now going to call respawn player. We got to compile before, so I do that every time. Compile so that we get our proper name here. I wish it automatically did that. Let's say, what was it? Respawn player. Now it should say player controller. Thank you. So let's plug this in. Whoops. Plug this in. It's asking for the player controller. It's going to come from here. So let's just add one more reroute. Reroute node. Like so. And that's going to be our player controller. So that's our initial setup. All of this stuff here. Comment around this and just say initial setup occurs on event post login. Handles lobby setup on player controller and spawns player. So initial setup occurs on event post login with 2 E's. Event post login and handles lobby setup on player controller and spawns the player. So that's good enough. All right, let's go ahead and do the respawn player here. Now this respawn player, it's called respawn player because we could use this to, if in our lobby map we allowed people to die, we could call it and respawn the player. So it's spawning and respawning technically. So let's go ahead and continue. First thing we're going to do is check and see if we have a pawn already. So we'll just drag off this and say get controlled pawn. Then we'll check and see if that's valid. So is valid question mark. Just connect this up. So is valid. If it is valid, we want to destroy that because we're going to spawn a new one for the player to possess. So we'll drag off of this and say destroy actor. So destroy actor. If it's not valid, then we're just going to spawn a new character for the player to possess. So we'll say spawn actor from class. We're going to be using the base character here. So let's go ahead and assign that. After we destroy, we're going to do that. If we don't have one, we're going to do that. So we're going to plug both in like so. Now it's going to ask for the spawn transform. Where do we want to spawn this character? Well, we're going to use one of our spawn points. So we can take our spawn points, hold control and drag that in. And we need to find out how many we have because we're going to pick a random one within this array here. So let's drag off of this and say length. And because this value is not going to be 0 based, we're going to have to subtract 1 from it. So it gives us our accurate number of spawn points that we have. And then we could say from this get one of those. And we're going to then say random int in range. So random integer in range between 0 and our max. So our array is 0 based. So it can pick the first one at 0, or it could pick however many we place in the level. Once we have that, then we could say get the actor transform of that spawn point. So get actor transform. Actor transform, and that's going to be our spawn transform. So, okay, then we need to actually possess that. So let's go ahead and do that. So at the end here, we'll say possess. Uncheck that real quick. Possess, like so. And see the pawn that we are going to possess is the one that we're spawning, like so. Plug that in. Plug that in. And the player controller is not going to be self. It's going to come from our player controller here. So I'm going to drag this down and add a reroute node here. And just plug that in like so. Now once we do this, we did create a node called everyone update. So we're going to call that at the end here because it's going to let everybody know that we have arrived at this point. So everyone update. So So our spawning in is handled. Let's add a comment around this and just say spawn the player as base character when arriving at the lobby menu. And I guess we could add one more thing to this. Let's also say that it static slash tells everyone to update their lobbies. Because we're going to call everyone update, which is going to be this script here, and this will be the process of having everyone update their lobby with the correct information. So I'm going to take this and move this down for a second because we're going to do this everyone update now. And this everyone update is a fun little script here. So for this, what we'll do is, first of all, let's grab our player controllers, hold control, drag that in. And let's get the length of this. How many player controllers do we have? So let's get length. We're then going to set that to a variable. So I'm going to promote this to a variable called current players. So this is going to be in the server settings and replicated. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. So we have track of how many people are currently connected. Then what we'll do is we'll branch here. So I'm going to hold B and left click to create a branch. Connect this up. The condition we're going to check against is the current number of players greater than 0? So greater than 0, integer greater than integer, greater than 0. If it isn't, then we're not going to do anything. If it is, then we're going to go through the process of updating our lobby here. So we need another variable before we continue here. This variable is going to be called connected players. And this variable is going to be of the player info type. So player info type. And it's going to be an array. And it's also going to be replicated. And we'll put it in server settings as well. And this is going to keep track of all of our player controllers, all of our connected players, their player info, their information for each individual player will be stored in this array. So first thing we'll do is we'll hold control, drag that in, drag off of this and say clear it out, because we're going to wipe it and then repopulate it as changes are made, just so that everybody gets the correct information. So we'll clear it out. Now we can start the process of updating it. So what we'll do now is we'll take all of our player controllers here, hold control, drag that in. And I'm going to hold F and left click to create a for loop. Connect this up for each of our player controllers. Let's connect this to that. For each of our player controllers, we're going to cast to the lobby player controller. So cast to lobby player controller. So, and once we've done that, inside of that, we have a setting called player settings. So get player settings. So get player settings on each individual lobby player controller. And we're going to add that to our connected players. So let's take our connected players here, control drag that in, drag off of it, and say add. Connect that up, connect that up. Okay. Once we've done that, there's also something inside of our lobby player controller called update number of players. So this will tell our lobby, our clients, our client version of the lobby player controller, the number of players in our lobby. So let's go ahead and take the current players, drag that on top, max players, drag that on top. Now looking at this, I'm noticing we didn't actually set this to replicated on the owning client. So I'm going to compile this real quick and save it. I'm going to double click on this now to take me to that. And we did not set this to execute on owning client. So let's go ahead and do that. And this should be replicated. So run on owning client and reliable. So let's compile and save that. Just notice that. So I'm going to hop back to the lobby GM now. Yeah, it should look like that. Okay, once we have gone through and got each player's player information and stored that as connected player and told each player the number of players that we have in the lobby currently, then what we'll do is we'll run another for loop here. So I'm going to F and left click off the completed. And we're going to use our player controllers again here. Connect this up. And we're going to cast the lobby player controller again now. So connect this up. Reason we're doing it like this again is we don't want to do it. We want to make sure that all of the player information is assigned and everybody has their updated information. We don't want to do it at the end of this. We want to make sure all this is done first before we start doing this next portion here. And that next portion is going to be to pass this variable here off to each player controller so that they have each of the connected players' information as well. So we have, I think it's called add player info. Yep, add player info. Now that we have that variable for everyone, we can take our connected players, drag that on top. So. And then what we're going to do is call that function that we created at the start of this video called update available characters. Let's connect that up. Now it's asking for the available characters, and as we stated earlier, this is going to be stored on the game mode, not on each individual client. So what we'll do is promote this to a variable, right click on it, promote it to a variable called available characters. So. And let's move that down. And this we'll add to the server settings and replicated. And I'm going to compile it real quick. Select it, because we need to add some values for this. So let's go ahead and do that. We have 8 characters in our game, plus the base character. So we're going to say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There we go. So base character and then all of our selectable characters here. So that's what that represents. And then the last thing that we're going to do, I'm going to scroll over to the right here just a little bit and add a custom event. Custom event. Let me turn this back on too. So we'll add a custom event. This custom event is just going to be called add to kick list. So whenever a player connects, we want to add them to a list of players that can be potentially kicked by the server. We're going to do that at the end here. So let's just say add to kick list. And we're not going to do this script just yet, but we're going to call that here to add that player. Okay, the last portion that we need to do is check and see if we can start the game if everybody has selected a character. So for this, what we'll do one more for loop here. And this is going to be a for each loop with break. So for each loop with break. And this is coming off the completed. And the array that we're going to use is our connected players. So I'm going to copy that and paste that down here. Plug that in. And what we're checking is our my player character in our player info. So we're going to break this apart. And right here is our my player character. Have we selected one? So we're going to say drag off this, hit 2 equal signs. And we're going to select the base class here. So out of all of our players that are connected, are any of them using the base character? So we're going to branch and check that. So I'm going to hold B and left click, connect the condition, connect the loop body, like so. And we should have already created our variable called can we start, which we have. So I'm going to hold Alt and drag that in now. If any of them are using base character, this is going to be set to false. No, we can't start because somebody has not selected a character yet. So I'm going to copy this and paste it. If we go through that list and none of them have this, that means they've all selected a character. At that point, we can start. So I'm going to set that to true. And instead of looping back around here to the break, I'm going to add a custom event to handle that. So we'll just call it custom event called cannot start game. And it doesn't need to be replicated. We just need to call it on the server side here. So at the end, we can say cannot start game. So that is everyone update. There's still some more stuff that we need to do before we close out this video here and test this. So I'm going to add a comment around this and say Updates all connected players lobby information when called. That sounds good. Something like that. And we'll do two more things here before we break. Let's go ahead and update the game settings for all connected players whenever the server makes changes. So we don't have an event for that yet. This swap character, we're going to do that a little bit later actually, so I'm going to move this over as well. That's our swap character there. We're going to do that later. Let's move that over, somewhere over there. Just stretch that out. You don't have to do that, but I'm just moving it out of the way. So we have launch the game left. We're going to do that in a second. I'm going to move this up here because it's going to be a little short script. So we have launch the game and one more section that we're going to do. So let's add a custom event here. Custom event. This custom event is going to be called server update game settings. So whenever the server decides to make changes in the game settings from our lobby menu, we're going to call this event, and we're going to update each of our game mode versions of our variables here. So we're going to make sure that this is run on the server, only run on the server and reliable. And it's going to need some inputs. So let's add, let's see, 4 inputs for this. And the first one will be a texture 2D reference. Second one will be text. Third one will be text. And the last one's going to be an integer. And the names for those will say map image, map name, map time, and map ID. So the map ID we're going to use to toggle between which map we want to select, and we'll set that up here in a second on launch the game. So if you have additional maps, you can number your maps by ID. You can also do it by text if you want, but ID is a little bit easier. So when this is called, what we're going to do is update our variables. So we're going to take our GM map image, just drag that and drop that on top there. Our map name, drag that and drop that on top. Move it over and connect it up. Map time, and whatever other variables that you want to have for your map settings. You can do something similar to this and add it here. Map ID, we don't have a variable for that yet, so I'm going to create one for that and promote this to a variable called the GM_map ID. Connect this up. And let's go ahead and server settings. Doesn't necessarily have to be replicated, but I'm going to do it just in case. So with that, what we'll then do is we'll take our player controllers, hold control, drag this in. We'll hold F and left click to create a for loop. Connect this up, connect this as our array that we're going to be running through. And inside of our player controller, we're going to cast to our lobby player controller, because inside of it we're going to call update lobby settings. So let's drag off of this and say update lobby settings. So we need to tell all of our clients that the server has made a change. You need to update your lobby settings to display that change. So now we can take our GM map, plug that in, map name, plug that in, and map time, plug that in. Now we don't need to worry about the map ID because we're going to do that here in a moment inside of our launch the game. So move that down here maybe. So I think that's all we need to do for this. Yep, let's add a comment around this and say server has made changes. Tell each client to update their lobby information. Okay, so there's that. And the last thing that we'll do is what happens when we actually launch the game. So let's do that here. So everybody's ready. The server has clicked start the session. What we'll do is we'll take our GM map ID here. We'll hold control, drag that in. And we're going to perform a switch on int. So we'll drag off this and say switch on int. We'll connect this. We'll add 2 pins, and we'll remove this default by right-clicking and remove. Now we only have 2 maps, so it's either going to be 0 or 1, but if you want to add additional maps, just come in, add a pin, and add a corresponding ID for that selection. And we'll get to that when we start setting up our game settings menu. We'll get to that at that point. So I'm going to remove this for now. So we have 0, which is going to be Arena 1, and 1, which is going to be Arena 2. So let's actually do that. So we're going to right-click and say execute console command. And the console command that we're going to execute is called server travel space / game / maps / arena 01. Now, if you've tried to use server travel in the past, there's a couple of things that you need to consider when doing it. We'll talk about those here in a second. Let me copy this and paste it. And we're going to change the end here to 02. And we'll connect both of these up like so. The specific player, we'll just say get player controller is fine. Plug that in and plug that in. And we'll add a comment around this and say launch the game based on map selection from game settings. Now the server travel command has to be lowercase, server travel / game / map / the name of your map. The other thing, if you go to class defaults, you also need to make sure that seamless travel is enabled on your game mode. So seamless travel, if you compile and save. This is not going to work in Pi. It only works, the plane editor, it will only work in standalone. So we can proceed from our main menu into our lobby map just fine. But as soon as we try to execute server travel from our lobby map into a new map for our gameplay map, it's just going to hang there. It's not going to work if we're doing it in a editor session. We need to do this in a standalone session. So with that, I'm going to double check all of our variables and make sure we don't need to set any of these. Some of these we will actually. The can we start, let's make sure that that is set by default as false. Player controllers, we won't need to set that. Spawn, we won't need to set that. Server name, we won't need to set that. Max, nope. Map image, we'll set the default for this. We'll just say Arena 1 is the default map. Map name, we could also do that here. We could just say Arena 1. The map time, we could say the default is, I don't know, 10 minutes. Current players, we don't need to set that. Connected players, we don't need to set that. Available characters, nope, don't need to set that because we already did. And the GM map ID, we don't need to set that either. We can leave that as 0 as Arena 1 as our default map. So with all of that, let's compile and save. And we should be able to test this out now. So I'm going to play. And we're at our main menu. Host comes in and says, all right, I want a server called My Happy Server. And My Happy Server has a maximum of 6 players that can join. When I hit accept, our lobby should show up. So our lobby shows up. My Happy Server, the name that we entered, 1 of 6 players because there's only me. Arena 01, time 10 minutes, and there's our default map. So we are moving right along. I think we're going to pause here actually, because what we want to work on next before we demo this here is what happens when a client connects to this. The client will see this information, but we have no way of knowing that the client has connected other than seeing them in the level. We need to create our player card, which will appear in this section here, which will have their avatar that they've selected, the name of the player, the name that they've entered, etc., their ready status. So we're going to set that up in the next video so that we can see when players have connected and see their information. So that's going to do it for this video. We'll pause here. We'll pick it back up in the next video where we start working on the player card setup.